Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're going to be going over some day one deck ideas to use cards from Explorer Anthology 3. In general, this anthology is basically a steaming pile of poop. It is not really that impactful in terms of the overall impact to the overall Pioneer format, kind of bridging with that. There are some decks that we did get closer to. However, I would suggest for this particular one, where the historic one has a lot of value, I would not suggest necessarily, unless there's a lot of cards you want here for Brawl or what have you. That's 4,000 gems, 25,000 gold is quite a steep price. This might be just a pick out a couple cards from wild cards and go from there. Personally, I will not be buying this and instead just be buying the historic one and then crafting a couple cards from along the way. So what we're going to do here is go over 4 deck lists for best of 3 and then 2 deck lists for best of 1. And stay tuned to the end because I actually built a deck with a quarter shield. The best card they obviously spoiled, but we are going to go through and look at the cards that came out and then we'll look at the decks themselves. So with blue we got Cyclonic Rift. This is a card that's going to see play basically in Historic Brawl. And this card does at times see a 1-of in the Lotus Field combo. However, we didn't get Hidden Strings, so we can't play the deck as it is necessarily. Abbot of Carol Keep saw some fringe play early on in the red-white Pia deck, but has largely been phased out. Shrapnel Blast, it's an interesting card. We have a deck featuring it, but it's probably going to be more of a fun of kind of style deck. Sylvan Scrying is very impactful. However, it is a card for the Lotus Field combo, but again, we didn't get the Hidden Strings, so we got part of it, but not all of it. Eidolon of the Blossoms sees no play whatsoever, so this is basically a bulk rare at this point. Court of Calling, very impactful card, lets us do these creature toolbox decks, also very good in the Historic Yawgmoth deck, or just kind of, if you want to play like a toolbox, Death and Taxes style deck with like silver bullets, you can use it in that deck as well. Worldspine Worm is part of the combo. So there's the Creativity combo with Worldspine Worm and Xenagod, which we got in this as well. Now, while these are impactful in terms of a deck in Pioneer, you only need 1 of each of these. So getting 4 of each Mythic is not really relevant in this particular instance. And a lot of the decks anyways have kind of shifted to either the Gearhulk version or the Atraxa version, but some still have it like as a backup plan, for example. Then we go to the multicolor. These cards are largely useless. So Judge's Familiar sees no play since it's standard time. Golgari Charm really doesn't see play. Simic Charm doesn't see play. Izzet Charm sees play in Phoenix, but they didn't give us any of the Delve cards. Gruul Charm sees very fringe play in the sideboards of some of the Gruul boat decks. And then like deal 3 damage to each creature. Flying is good against spirits, for example. Orzhov Charm sees no play whatsoever either. Voice of Resurgence sees play in some of the green-white kind of company shells, which we'll look at a couple options. Deathrite Shaman, not really playable without the existence of fetch lands. Obsidat, which was one of my favorite cards in Standard, a powerhouse there, but this is not Gatecrash Standard RTR block. This isn't 10 plus years ago. This card is largely phased out in terms of power level. Omnath Locus of Rage is going to be a brawl card, and like I mentioned with Xenagod, it's only going to see play as a 1-of in the combo. We have a quarter shield, which it's the biggest insult I think that you could have possibly put in here, but like I said, we built a deck with it. It is going to be featured. We built a deck that can use a quarter shield to potentially win the game. The lands that they included, these like canopy lands, like reveal lands, whatever they're called, are not good. They don't see play at all in any of the formats. The only one that sees very fringe play is Prairie Stream. So in the blue-white control decks that are non-Lotus Field, the Prairie Stream gets played for laydown arms, so it does increase the count there. But all this is doing is just kind of tweaking the mana base of an existing deck. Thespian Stage is nice because we do get access to have the ability to use Lotus Field with the stage. However, we don't have Hidden Strings, but we can play blue-white Lotus Field Control, which is a deck we'll look at as well. So that's kind of the high level. We're going to jump into it. Again, these decks are things I want to try out for day one. They're somewhat ports from what I've found for Pioneer, or in some instances, they're brews as well. None of these I'm claiming to be the next tier 1 break the meta, but it's things to give you started in terms of your journey. So some of the decks that we do see, there's the Vehicles shell that gets played in his Explorer and Pioneer. It's typically Gruul, but there are some folks experimenting with these green-white versions. So you still have your shell of Eska's Chariot as well as the Sky Sovereign. We can make that a little bigger. So you still have your 8 Elves to kind of ramp you up. You have Voice of Resurgence, which sees play here. Another creature that's just nice to kind of tax the instant speed decks. Some copies of Dromoka's Command, which either prevents all damage from instant sorcery, sacks an enchantment for your opponent, put counters, or lets you be a fight spell, so you get to choose 2 of those modes. You have Malira, which is kind of like a protection spell for your creatures. Then you have your 3-drops, Lovestruck Beast, Skyclave Apparition, and Adeline. And then you also have Steel Seraph, which will be predominantly played as a 3-drop in this deck. This is another card that can give you lifelink, flying, so say you have a big Adeline, you can fly over your opponent's creatures, get some value there. So similar idea to like what you see in the green red version, a little bit more interaction, some ability to get lifelink, go wide, and then less haste options. Sideboard, you have Scavenging Ooze for Graveyard Hate, Containment Priest for like creativity or combos, Bankbuster for the grindier games, another Apparition, Redain for the big mana decks, Spellbinder for like hand hate, and then Brutal Cathar as more removal. We then go to Azorius Lotus Field Control. So we're actually going to start in the mana base with this particular one. So with this deck here, you're using Lotus Field. So normally this is the downside of the card. It enters the battlefield. You have to sacrifice 2 lands, but it is a hexproof land that adds 3 mana of any color. You can use that mana with Thespian Stage to get ahead on the mana, but we have ways to get around the Lotus Field sack ability. With Strict Proctor, whenever a permanent enters the battlefield would trigger an ability, you counter it unless they pay 2. Because it's your own ability, you decline it. So Strict Proctor on 2, Lotus Field on 3. That means you get basically 5 mana on turn 3 that you can untap with. There's also Discontinuity. If you cast this during your turn, it costs 2 less. So you basically stifle the trigger on the stack. When you then have 6 mana, you can basically time walk your opponent, let them cast a spell, and then you just end the turn with the card on the stack and kind of phase them out that way there. Rest of the deck is kind of the blue-white control deck that we've seen. Access to Doomscar, Shark Typhoons, Farewells, Dream Trawler, Hullbreaker as your win conditions, along with Teferi, Wandering Emperor, kind of mixed into there, Memory Deluge for card advantage. The Doomscar sees play over the Spring Verdict here because you can foretell it, and then for 3 mana, notably 3 mana is kind of the key here, because your Lotus Field taps for 3 mana on its own. Your sideboard, you have Lantern of the Lost for Graveyard Hate, March of Otherworldly for just removal, Aether Gust for red-green stuff, you got a bunch of counters, another Dream Trawler, and then Thought Distortion. Because the Lotus Field can produce any color mana, you can basically, against control mirrors or stuff like that, just strip them of all their resources. We then go to the Izzet Creativity combo deck. So this was kind of like what we saw at the last PT. The one card that we don't have from the list is Dig Through Time. Just replace that with the Prismari command. Fulfills kind of an idea similar. Basically can make you treasures, can help you loot, and in a pinch deal with some potential hate pieces. But the core of the deck, what you're trying to do with this one is create treasures or tokens. So Big Score makes tokens, Fable makes tokens, Secrets of the Key makes tokens, and then you use creativity on those tokens. You get both Xenagos and Worldspine. You need to target 2 things, and then you give haste to the Worldspine Worm, and then it's a 30 power trample haste that comes into your opponent. You can also target, this version's on the Myrex. Sometimes you'll see Mutavault as well as a way to make tokens, or just have a creature. Usually you'll see Mutavault in the single copy target, so things like Atraxa, stuff like that. But Myrex is an interesting inclusion here. Sideboards just like counterspells, removal, and then against heavy counterspell decks, you have the Shark Typhoon, Hullbreaker horror package in there. We then go to Explore Elves. So this is a deck that's leveraging Chord of Calling that lets you kind of tutor for specific creatures. One of the big payoffs of the deck is Shaman of the Pack that lets you deal damage to your opponent equal to the number of elves you control. The deck itself's got a lot of 1-mana accelerants, get you ahead on mana. Leaf Crown Visionary lets you kind of get pseudo draw. When you cast elves, it's also a Lord effect. Dwindlin's Elite makes 2 bodies for you. Elvish War Masters have really good mana sink to pump your team and makes more tokens. And then the Visionary can draw you cards, and then it's also a Collected Company shell. You have Nykthos in the mana base to give you big mana, and then Secluded Courtyard helps cast your spells. The sideboard gives you some options in terms of hate pieces. So you have Mistcaller, which can be used for like Collected Company decks or Creativity decks. They get exiled. You have Mass Vandal for Artifact Enchantment hate, Phyrexian Revoker for activated abilities, Selfless Spirit as protection, Dranith Magistrate if they're casting cards from anywhere outside of their hand, Yasharn for sacrifice decks, and then I don't know what Stain the Mind does. Let's see. So name an online card, search target player's graveyard. Okay, so that's just like Necromentia, so I do have to replace this. So this should be a different card. We don't have this in the format right now. So we can just put this as Stonebrain for like combo decks. So I'll replace that with Vivians and Pylons as well. Tried to catch all the kind of older cards, but sometimes they sneak up on us. But we will just switch that to Stonebrain. Then for best of 1, we have it's a little phased out. This was like early Pioneer, like 2019 when the format was first getting started. The Izzet Scissors deck was quite popular. So using things like Ensoul Artifact as well as Skilled Animator. And then more recently, we have the Black Staff of Waterdeep, which is a way to animate artifacts. So you get like these small creatures that can get boosts, but you can play stuff like that. You can also in the mana place play Darksteel Citadel as another indestructible. But the deck is playing a bunch of cheap artifacts. You have Ornithopter, Stonecoil can get some bonus. The nice thing with Stonecoil is it gets the counters. It has Trample, and then whatever the base. So if you get plus 5/5, plus all the counters on top for more power. Bomat Courier for card advantage. Ginger Brute can be unblockable. We have Surge Engine, which can be unblockable, and then late game draw you cards as well. Halo Hopper is a way that you can convoke with other creatures to cheat it in. So if you have like, say, Ornithopter 1-drop, you can then cast Halo Hopper as well in the opener. So it's kind of an idea there. And then Shrapnel Blast as a way to just sacrifice an artifact late game to deal 5 damage to your opponent, as well as Yotai as another way to have cheap Thopter. It lets you tap to deal damage and then gives your an artifact base power 4/4. So this is a best of 1 deck. We also have Mutavaults in the mana base. And then lastly, people are waiting for it, the Accorder's Shield deck. So clearly the best card in the format. Rakdos decks are feverishly adjusting to take out their Shieldreds to put in Accorder's Shields, the best card there is. So this card's useless in most contexts, but the only thing that's relevant about this card is it costs 0 mana. And what we are going to do is a combo deck. So Song of Creation combo. So how this works, 4 mana, you get an enchantment. You can play an additional land on each of your turns. Whenever you cast a spell, you draw 2 cards, and then at the beginning of your end step, you discard your hand. So you play this out, you play an additional land, ideally a blue producing land that's untapped. From there, you just start stringing together casting 0 mana spells. So Tormod's Crypt, you have Ornithopter, Stonecoil basically cast for 0, Straw Cornucopia cast for 0, Quarter Shield cast for 0, Chamber Sentry cast for 0, Mox Amber, you get all the jazz. You draw a bunch of cards. You also have Roselight Acolyte, which is basically just a ritual. You pay a mana to add a mana, and then draw 2 cards. If you need to, you can actually set it up where either this is a play on turn 3 to add an additional mana, like you can tap to use it that way, or it can, if you do need an extra turn, you can't combo that same turn because this is on adventure. Even though you discard your hand, you can have a spell to start the cycle. What you're trying to do is throughout the combo, you're going to find your copies of an offer you can't refuse, and you're going to counter one of your non-creature spells that cost 0 mana while it's on the stack. From there, you're going to net mana to eventually get to 4 mana that you can cast Jace Wielder of Mystery. At that point, the goal is to draw your entire deck, play Jace, and then draw the last card, and then you win through Jace's static ability. So it's a very kind of click-intensive deck, but when it kind of pops off, we see this in Historic sometimes. But with Historic, you have a bit more density in terms of 0 cost, and then like Strike It Rich style effects like that. Just a couple more cards. You also have Grape Shot as the win condition. But this deck is kind of an all-in combo deck built around Song of Creation. So we did it. It's a piece of the cog of the puzzle. But yeah, this card's very much an insult to folks that were looking for much more playable cards in the format. But that's it. Let me know what you're thinking of building. If you are going to craft or purchase this anthology, let me know in the comments. And as you can see here in the bottom left corner, we are on a 10K sub goal for the channel. Let's get into a nice dark section so we can see. So we're trying to get to 10,000 subs on the channel by the end of the month of July. If you haven't subbed to the channel, it's free, easy, helps out the channel. Same if you have subbed, likes and comments are always greatly appreciated. We're about 680 short of that goal. So every little sub helps to meet that kind of stretch milestone. In any case, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one and stay safe out there.